Hi, everybody. So we're here. We're really excited to interview Jen, who is a physiotherapist specializing especially in working with people among the circus community. So I'm sure you guys have all seen the amazing videos like on Instagram or YouTube or whatever with these circus people who can make the incredible shapes with their bodies. And Jen is one of the people who helps look after these incredible circus performers. I found Jen on Instagram, and I knew I had to ask her to lend her expertise to hypermobile yogis. So I'll stop talking now. Jen, why don't you just give us a little bit more information about you and your background?
Yeah, so I'm a physical therapist. I've been practicing for about 9 years, but I've been working with circus artists and performing artists, a lot of dancers as well, for about the past 5 years. So I grew up doing ballet and dancing, and then as I transitioned into the circus world, I am a hypermobile person, so I've kind of personally dealt with that for my life and my circus career, and then also working with this population. There are, so many of the artists that I work with have congenital hypermobility or somewhere on that spectrum of hypermobility to Ehlers-Danlos. So it's just something that's really prevalent in this population. So it's definitely something that I've worked with for quite some time, and yeah, it's definitely something that a lot of people aren't as aware about, and like we were kind of talking about before, when they become aware that this is an issue and that there are many things that you can do to help protect your joints and protect your body and address it while still doing what you love, people get really excited about it. So this is definitely something that I really enjoy working with people who have hypermobility, and just kind of teaching them how to take care of their bodies so that they can do what they love.
So Jen, you said that you love teaching people like strategies so that they can still keep doing the things they love. Have you got anything that you can share, any tools or strategies that you like, oh my goodness, this thing, if people did this, it could really.
Yeah. It's hard to distill into one thing or one strategy, but I think in general, especially, in general, especially with, I think people who do yoga, there's this really big misconception that when you're stretching, there are kind of a few misconceptions. One is that people who are hypermobile should not be stretching. And I think that isn't always true. And then the second kind of misconception that goes along with that is when you stretch, you're just supposed to relax everything and just like really relax into the stretch and just sit into it and try to not engage anything. And that's something that's probably one of the number one points of education that I talk about when I work with these artists is when you're stretching, you need to be actively engaging muscles. It should be something that you are very thoughtfully thinking about what muscle is opposing the group that's being stretched, how to engage that, and then what are the proximal or like the higher up the chain stabilizers that need to be engaged. So your core, your hip muscles, all of these stabilizers are really important to keep engaged when you're stretching. And that not only protects joints that are hypermobile, but it also helps to let your brain know that you're safe in that stretch. And then typically it will allow you to get a bit farther. So that's probably the most broad piece of advice that I can give, is to just like not relax into a stretch almost ever.
Oh my goodness. We are so happy you are saying this, because I feel like that is definitely one of the biggest issues that I'm facing as a yoga teacher, to really share with people and tell them, guys, like, we get it that you can go into this amazing range, but it's just so harmful if you're just sitting in the end range. Would you mind just expanding a little bit about the science of what would happen to joints if the muscles would disengage, just so that it's not just us saying the same thing to people, but it would be really nice, because you've got so much experience, especially within the demographic that you're working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely. And I think that historically, especially in performing arts, this world comes from a culture of a lot of passive stretching, and not just passive stretching, but like sitting in a split and having like a weight bag on your front knee to push into hyperextension. So there's a lot, that's kind of like the foundations of a lot of this culture. And I think getting out of that definitely requires a lot of understanding of what actually happens when you do that and why that isn't always the best practice. So from a structural perspective, it really depends on what joint we're talking about. But if we take the knee, for example, there are a lot of different things that can limit knee extension. So knee straightening, and then like a pike, so a forward fold. A lot of us think that if you put like a weight bag or really just stretch and slam into it without engaging, that you'll get deeper into your hamstrings, because that's what most people think commonly limits that part of flexibility. But really what often happens in that stretch is if you're completely disengaging everything, you are very likely to bypass the hamstrings entirely and really just lean into what we call passive structures of the knee. So the knee ligaments, the knee capsule, these non-extensible tissues that aren't meant to contract and expand, and really they don't have those elastic properties. Once these are stretched, so once ligaments are stretched, so all of the, like your ACL, your anterior cruciate ligament, and then your PCL and some other structures in the knee, once those are stretched, those typically don't recoil, they don't go back to their normal length. So then that's something that you're dealing with for the rest of your life. And then that also comes with a decrease in stability in your knee. So these people are much more likely to sustain injuries of their knee ligaments, or these are the people that tend to get ACL tears because they don't have that passive integrity anymore as they've stretched through all of that. This can, and this is kind of where hypermobile people, we tend to have a bit more of this kind of just normal for us joint laxity, where our ligaments and our joint capsule, the fibrous covering of our joints, are a little bit more loose, and that's just how we are. So it's especially important that people who are hypermobile really don't push in that way, because we already are kind of having to do more work up front to help protect and manage our hypermobility. So we don't want to make that any worse than it is. There are a lot of ways that you can protect the joint when you have this hypermobility and this lax ligaments and joint capsule. So it's definitely not something where it's like, oh, you're hypermobile, you're definitely going to tear your ACL. There's so many things that we can do to protect our knees and continue stretching and doing what we want. But it's definitely a huge consideration that if, depending on, what you want to do, you definitely need to think about a few extra things that other people who aren't hypermobile or who haven't passively stretched their joints in that way don't necessarily have to think about.
Cool, thanks. That's
amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that is all of the kind of stuff that I just want everybody to hear. But now, I think one of the differences between the yoga world and the circus world is in the yoga world, I feel like on the surface, we're like, it doesn't matter what it looks like, and it's all about the journey, and this is the message that we're always trying to put out there, that it's not about the shape that you make, it's about what you learn on the way and all of this nice stuff. But we're still like human beings with egos, and we want to be able to get into a split. We just want to be able to do these cool things. And so, and then in the circus world, I can imagine there's kind of less, there's conflict in that way. It's like, we want to do a split. Cool. Let's, we're gonna get the split. So I guess my question is like, how would you work with somebody who is just like so ready to get this skill, and they want to, they don't even care about like protecting their joints, maybe especially somebody who's a bit younger and that hasn't had to deal with an injury yet, so they're still a little bit naive. How would you what would you say to them to encourage them to remain safe in the way that they're stretching, to work towards these skills and these goals, but to stay safe?
Yeah, that's really hard. And honestly, I've found throughout the years working with athletes of different different ages and at different points in their life, that they're, it's really hard to convince somebody to change their practices with something like this. Definitely there's a lot of education that you can do. And, I'll often tell people, kind of what we just talked about, like, I know that you really want this skill now, but like, it'd be awesome if you could still do oversplits when you're 60 and not have some, think about more the quality of your future life. And like, do you want this to be a career? And if you want this to be a career for you, or even just like a hobby that you love doing, I mean, people do yoga throughout their entire lives. And I think that that's often a good motivator, or at least will help people kind of step back and think about how to approach something that they want so instantly, and to have that instant gratification. I think something else that typically works really well is connecting these younger, more kind of naive, like you were saying, more naive people with older people who have kind of walked that path, and to just be like, hey, this person, talk to this person, like tell them about what you've gone through. Obviously that takes consent from both parties, but I think that that's something that works, that tends to work better than a medical provider being like, you should do this differently. Because that doesn't always go over well. And really, like, I do see that younger people, or people who are earlier on in their journey or their career or whatever they're working on, it's really, you kind of just have to let them live their life to a certain point, do your best to educate them, but then that's kind of all you can really do.
It's true. I mean, yeah, my injuries were my best teachers, as many people. Injuries are your best teachers. So
I can, in fact, I learned so much about my injuries just going to the physio and asking questions and being super curious. And it was actually in that journey that she was like, you do know you're hypermobile, don't you? I was like, I mean, I know, but hypermobile, are you sure? But something you said that was so beautiful was, you want to keep doing what you love well past your 60s. And we posted our hypermobile content, and a good friend of ours was like, come on, we're all going to be in pain by the time we're in our 60s and 70s and 80s. We might as well do what we want now. And my heart kind of sank a little bit, because I was like, a part of me was like, oh my goodness, is she right? Are we doing this for nothing? Or another part of me was just sad, going, come on, there's got to be a better way.
Definitely. Absolutely. And I think that that's something that I think is starting to change in this kind of yoga, circus, performing arts culture. But I think that that's definitely something that a lot of people just think is like, oh, once I get to like a certain age, I'm just going to be in pain. And that doesn't need to be true. And we can definitely do things when we're younger, to make sure that we're still going to be on the right track at that point.
Yeah, I mean, well, I have to say, my first year of practicing yoga, when I didn't yet realize how to properly make the most of my hypermobile body, I was in so much pain. And now, 3 years on, I feel so much better, so much stronger than I ever did before. So I think, like, I've gotten better. I feel stronger and more stable and more energetic and just all around better in my body than I did when I was younger. And the way I see it is, you can keep getting better as you get older. And I completely, like, if people don't hear any other message, I want them to at least hear that you don't have to just give up and accept pain and discomfort because you're old. Like, no, it doesn't have to work like that.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. I think something that is very prevalent in performing arts, and maybe a little bit less prevalent in yoga, I think, but maybe not, is this concept of no pain, no gain. And, if just push through all of the discomfort, because that will always lead you to, your goal or your intended outcome. And I think that there's been a lot of education lately surrounding, it's not always no pain, no gain. You need to sometimes work smarter and really think through what your goals are and what steps you need to take to get there. and really start to discern what you're feeling and what sensations mean and what different stretching sensations mean and what productive versus non-productive discomfort is, and start to think through that. And I think that once people understand that, it's much easier to, help avoid injury or rehab from an injury or progress in your practice. So, yeah.
I love what you just said, productive versus non-productive pain. That just sums it up so beautifully, because I personally understand the no pain, no gain concept in terms of, if I go to the gym, I'm going to be hurting the next day because I've lifted heavy things up, and that's my muscles work hard. But for sure, there's that unproductive feeling of when you're in your joints and it's just painful. So another question I really wanted to ask you, Jen, was one of the great things about interviewing someone like you is you really understand the value of understanding the latest research and science that's surrounding looking after people's bodies in the best way. So what would you say, is there anything that perhaps you've read or learned recently about hypermobility that really caught your attention, that you're like, oh, that's interesting? Is there anything new that maybe we haven't even discovered ourselves yet?
There hasn't been, to my knowledge, a whole lot of new and exciting things about hypermobility as related to kind of yoga and stretching and this demographic. I think the frustrating thing is that there's a lot of research and a lot of evidence on stretching and what benefits we do and don't get from it. But usually that information is taken and then applied to mainstream sports like soccer and football and running, cycling, those types of sports. So we know a lot about that. We know a lot about how to kind of protect people who are hypermobile in these mainstream sports. But there's really a large lack of evidence looking at how to manage hypermobility in a setting that also requires flexibility. And I think that's where it's very frustrating for a lot of people who do yoga or any other sport that requires flexibility beyond normal range of motion, is that they'll go to a healthcare provider and they'll be told that they're hypermobile, and then they'll be told that they need to not stretch, and that those just always go hand in hand. And so yeah, I would love to read some new literature surrounding hypermobility, but nothing that I've seen that is new and especially exciting lately, unfortunately.
Problem. It's just good to hear that actually there was not like gaps in our knowledge from someone like you, because you're so at your fingertips, and you're working with these incredible artists. So it's just comforting to know there's no big gaps.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've been researching a lot, and we've noticed that there's not that much information out there. But I'm really glad that you said that. Again, like reiterating, you said it again at the beginning, that just because you're hypermobile does not mean that you have to stop doing what you love, whether it's, circus type stuff or yoga or, dance or gymnastics or something that requires flexibility. That we've had a lot of messages from people saying, oh, my doctor told me I'm hypermobile and that I should stop practicing yoga. And we're like, no, it doesn't have to be that way.
It's just altering the approach, really.
Right. Yeah. And so many things about yoga are so good for hypermobility. I mean, there's so much in yoga surrounding like standing balance postures and activating your core muscles in a productive and correct way to transition into like normal life, even working on hip muscle strength and leg strength. Like there's so many good things from yoga that you can get that will help protect your hypermobility, that it's such a shame. And I think it's such a cop-out when healthcare providers are just like, just stop doing what you're doing. Like, actually, be more than that.
Something that I have found as a physio and also a yoga teacher, and it kind of it gives me the heebie-jeebies to even talk about it, but a lot of you, you're talking about stability of the hip muscles, and I'm assuming you're referring to the glutes.
Yeah.
Because so many yoga teachers are telling people to relax their glutes.
I know.
in back bends and in standing balances. And I'm like, ah. So as another physiotherapist, it would just mean so much to us both to share with our community your opinion on the glutes, just because like, guys, come on. But I feel like I'm very lone flying this flag. Like little but if we could hear your opinion, it would mean so much to us, please.
Absolutely. I have so many opinions on the glutes. Yeah, no, I think that's such a huge issue. And it's definitely, I've seen that a lot in yoga where, like you're saying, in a back bend, coaches will, or yoga teachers and coaches and contortion coaches will tell people to just relax their glutes in the back bend and push up through their legs or use a different muscle group entirely. And it's so counterintuitive. I mean, if we look at the role of the glutes, they extend the hip. They bring our leg behind us. And if you're in a wheel pose, that is a composite back bend where you need your hips, your entire spine, and your shoulders to be in pretty much end range extension. It makes very logical sense that we would want to then engage all of the muscles that put us into that position, from our shoulders to our upper back to our low back to our hips. And of all of those muscles, the glutes are the biggest and strongest of all of the muscles that do total body extension. So why would you want to turn those off? Just like, yeah. The first time I heard that, I was like, what? What are you hoping to accomplish from this? And yeah, it makes no sense.
Some of the things that yoga teachers are saying in the community is, one, it's going to compress the SI joint.
Yeah.
Two, it's going to give you sciatic nerve syndrome. Can you please shed some light for the community? So again, I don't want to be the only one saying the same thing to people. I want to, by the way, guys, we've never met each other.
Yeah.
Of the world, this is our first interaction, so it's not like we pre-planned this.
I love it.
Your insights with us.
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, the issue of like it compresses the SI joint or low back, like it, and I have a really hard time answering these questions because I'm just like, but it just doesn't.
It doesn't even cross those joints, so it can't.
It doesn't. Yeah, I'm like, it doesn't, your glutes don't cross your lumbar spine. They don't anatomically on anybody. They just don't. So it wouldn't be possible to compress. You can't compress a joint that you don't cross, right? So I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't do that. But then my counter argument is typically, okay, so it doesn't cross the low back, so you can't compress a joint you don't cross. What it does is protect the low back, because if we look at just anatomically and biomechanically what all of these different joints that are involved in a back bend do, our low back, our lumbar spine is always going to contribute the most to a back bend, because structurally that's just the direction it was made to go more in than your upper back or our hips. So we're already going to get a lot through our low back. Low back injuries are so prevalent in people that do a lot of back bends because we don't get anything or what we should be getting from our shoulders, upper back, and hips. So then it would make sense that if we want to protect our low back from compressing and doing too much and overworking in this back bend, wouldn't we want to bring in the biggest mover muscle that we have that will help take some of the stress off the low back? Probably yes, we would probably want to do that. Yeah. So and then again, like the other issues like causing sciatica. I mean, typically sciatica comes from a completely different mechanism of injury. There are people who have sciatic pain from back bending, but it's typically from overuse of the low back that is irritating a nerve that contributes to
a weak.
Yeah, right. If you have weak glutes, a lot of bad things happen. But I think that another thing that I run into with strength and glute training definitely in yoga, definitely in circus, is that our glutes are very strong, but only strong in certain positions, like in a squat. Glutes typically know how to work really well from hip flexion, so like in a squat to neutral, so just like a standing position. That doesn't always translate to being strong in extension when our leg is behind us, like in a back bend. So I think for a lot of people, it's talking about, okay, well, your glutes aren't weak. They just don't quite know how to work yet in this hip extension position. So then let's work on training them in this position so that your brain can start to wire them more effectively to use this awesome muscle group that is so protective for so many issues in this position that you want to be in. So yeah.
That, I feel like that comes like really nicely full circle, going back to just remaining in like this muscle activation, because like no matter you know, if glutes are strong and they know how to switch on in the range of motion from like a squat to standing, but then when it comes to hip extension, they don't work, then that means we don't have like strength in the full range of motion. And so the more that you're keeping the muscles active throughout all of your movements, the more you're teaching these muscles to just, you know, you're building the strength in the full range of motion from, whichever extreme to the other extreme that you can go in.
Yeah, and then it transitions into all of these different active poses in yoga and in performing arts, like like a standing arabesque. If you have strong glutes and extension that you have worked on training in a wheel pose, then you're going to be able to get a lot more out of anything like a standing arabesque or anytime your leg is behind you. It'll look better, it'll make a better Instagram picture, and it will protect your low back. Like you literally get all the wins.
Yeah, great Instagram picture and your low back is protected. Woo! I sign up for that.
And I know that this is digressing because we have actually given Jen some questions to look at before this interview, but one of the things that we didn't ask about glutes, just to clarify, that one just came out of nowhere. One of the things that is another little off-piece question, and when you're working with people with hypermobility, and especially EDS, we don't know that much about EDS actually, so I don't know if you have any insights on EDS for us, we'll be so grateful. But is fatigue something that you see with these artists? And I don't know if you have any insights around this.
Fatigue, like more than like fatigue as related to a yoga practice or just like chronic fatigue?
Yeah, I think
well, you know, I
read that chronic fatigue is higher among people who are hypermobile, but also just this point that people reach where it's like they're going and going and going, and then they've got
just
nothing,
crash,
and they're just totally exhausted.
We were just curious if in your practice this is something you're picking up on. And not necessarily any tools, because we realize that might be out of your remit or whatever, but if you have anything that you want to share, we'll be just grateful to hear.
You know, I don't think I've ever personally, anecdotally in my practice correlated hypermobility exclusively with increased fatigue in the patients I've worked with. I think that that's a difficult question because the people that tend to come to me and work with me are usually very highly active, and many of them are either really enthusiastic hobbyists who do this all the time or this is their career. So I see a ton of chronic fatigue and a ton of overtraining, but it's so ingrained in this society and culture that I think it would be really hard to be like, to pick out the hypermobile people from that and see if that correlates, because everyone's just exhausted.
Listen, okay.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think if you've got anything else that you want to add, then please go for it. And if not, just let everybody know like where they can find out a little bit more about you, and where can they find you if they want to like follow you on any social media platforms or whatever.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of really awesome points. I think we talked about all of my main talking points with like just really working on stabilizing all of the muscles around the joint that you're stretching, not relaxing in a stretch. Focus on active flexibility at your end range, like glutes and a back bend. Those are definitely the key points. But yeah, my Instagram is kind of dedicated to educating people, and especially people who want to be flexible beyond normal limits, educating about how to do that safely. What are some good exercises? So I post a lot of exercises and drills on Instagram. I'm Cirque Physio, so Cirque, CIRQUE_PHYSIO. My website is cirquephysio.com. Those are probably the main channels. So yeah.
And we'll definitely link all of those so people can easily find you. And guys, it is so worth following Jen, all the amazing content that she puts out there.
I love your Instagram, Jen.
Yeah, you're great, honestly. And we are so grateful that you managed to say yes to us for this interview. So we can't share this with everyone, and we'll share it with you as well. And then, let everyone know about this amazing topic.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.